Today I'm starting a brand new teaching series in the book of Hosea in the Old Testament. It's just a little prophet, just a 10, 12 chapters tucked into the middle of the prophets in the Old Testament, which is before Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's back in there. If you go flipping through, you'll find it somewhere through there. And of course, you can use your handout this morning to follow along with the scripture. I want to say welcome to everybody who is here and also to all the folks in Clovis, New Mexico. In fact, Adrian, would you do me a favor and stick up the picture, put up the picture that's on the schedule there of the folks in Clovis. I haven't updated you on them in a little while, but God's helping them in Clovis at Servant's Heart Chapel, and the church is growing. They're reaching new people, and last week they baptized, last week or the week before they baptized Karina, a young lady that's been going there, and Karina and Marcos just had the cutest little kid, the cutest little baby on Facebook that I just saw just a picture yesterday, just a little grin, and it's just cute as anything. So all y'all in Clovis, New Mexico, and Zanesville, Ohio as well, we're so glad you're here, and want to welcome you y'all to this new series as well. Would y'all give them a round of applause and tell them you're glad they're here? All right. I want to talk to you out of the book of Hosea today, and this story is a very interesting story. It's a little different. The word prophet in the Old Testament means one who speaks for God. Sometimes they wouldn't even use the word prophet; they would just say Ish Elohim, a man of God. It's a person who speaks for the Lord. He would carry messages that God would say, I want you to go and say this to this person. Sometimes God would ask a prophet to do something that was supposed to be illustrating some truth spiritually. There's a lot of different prophets that God said, I want you to do this, and that would be like an illustration in their life of the way that God was interacting with His people, or some prediction God would make about some country. The book of Hosea is probably unique in that story of prophets who illustrate God's work, because God didn't just give Hosea a message to go carry. He asked Hosea to live a message and literally pour his whole life into showing a message to the children of Israel, God's people, the Jews. And so today we're going to launch into that, and we're in Hosea chapter 1, verse 1. If you're following along in your handout, all the scriptures that you'll need today from the book of Hosea will be right there. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, son of Beeri, during the reign of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the reign of Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, king of Israel. Now, we just ran past a whole bunch of names there, and some of you are like Uzahu and Jerahu, and so let me just stop and kind of put this in context for you, all right? The run-up to this moment in Israel's history goes kind of like this. God came to a man who was a God-fearing sort of man, but really a polytheist who worshipped different gods, came to him and revealed himself to this man. This man's name was Abram, and God said, I'm going to change your name to Abraham, and I'm going to give you a son, and through that son, through your family, all the nations of the world will be blessed. God had decided to do something unique in history. He had decided to reveal himself through a nation, through a group of people. And so he came to Abraham and said, you're going to have a son. The problem is, at the time when God first said this to Abraham, Abraham was 75 years old. Not exactly childbearing sort of years in that time of history. And so when he came to Abram and said, I'm going to make you the father of many nations, he changed his name to Abraham, and he said, I'm going to make you the father of many nations, and the Bible says that Abraham believed God, and God counted it to him for righteousness. In fact, that's the way we are saved as well, not by the good things that we do or how many bad things we've avoided. We are saved by believing God, just like Abraham was, it says in Romans chapter 4. So Abraham believes God. The problem is God delays until Abraham is 100 years old. 25 years after God made the promise, then God kept the promise, and he had a son whose name was Isaac. Since Liz and I are up in our mid-30s, we named our baby William Isaac because Sarah, when she heard that she was going to have a baby in her old age, she laughed. And so we said, since we're having a baby in our old age, we're going to laugh too. So we named 35, okay, 36. So Isaac means laughter because Sarah, Abraham's wife, laughed when she heard she was going to have a baby. She said, I'm not going to have a baby. And she laughed, but God kept his promise. And Isaac had another son named Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, and those 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. After that 12 tribes was born, they began to multiply and have sons and daughters, and they traveled down to Egypt during the time of Joseph, who was one of Jacob's sons. They traveled down to Egypt, and there they began to multiply and become bigger and bigger. They were having a boatload of kids, y'all. I think some of them must have been named Stetler. And so they had lots of children, and as they grew and multiplied as a nation, the Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, got really worried and said, I'm not really impressed with this. I don't like the fact that they're multiplying so quickly. And he came in, took over, and made them slaves. And for 430 years, they lived in the country of Egypt, even though God had promised Abraham, I'm going to give you this land of Canaan. They left the land of Canaan, went to Egypt for 430 years, but they multiplied exceedingly during that 430 years, so that some scholars believe there could have been 1 or 2 million people that left when Moses came along. I'm sure you've all heard that story. Moses came along, and God reveals himself to his people again and says, I am the Lord, and I'm going to take you out of Egypt and take you to the land that I promised to Abraham your father. And he did. God did incredible things, amazing things. And the reason I'm backing up this far into history is because God said to the children of Israel, I am going to take you, and I'm going to engage you to me like a man engages himself to a wife. He said, I'm going to make you, I want you for myself, and I'm chasing after you. They weren't looking for God. God came looking for them. And he said, I'm going to take you to myself, and I want you to be only for me. I want you to be for nobody else but me. I want you to stay faithful to me. I want you to not worship anybody but me. I want you to find your satisfaction and joy in no other God but me. God said, I'm going to engage myself to you. I'm going to marry you, this people. Now, God did amazing things for this people that he was pursuing. He did incredible things. They were being chased by the Egyptian army to wipe them out. Not only the 10 plagues of Egypt, which you probably heard of, and then God brought them out. And then the Pharaoh said, oh, why did I let my slave labor go? And he starts chasing after them, and they are stuck between the Red Sea in front of them and the chariots of Pharaoh in behind them. And God did a supernatural, amazing thing and caused there to spring up a fire between them to hold them off through the night, to hold off the Egyptian army through the night. And through the night, a wind blew, and when the sun came up the next morning, there was a dry path through the middle of the Red Sea. And God took his people through that path on dry ground. That's crazy. Nobody does that. In fact, a lot of scholars have made fun of that and said, that's just, it was a shallow place, and they went through in the shallow place in the Red Sea. In fact, I heard a story of an old saint of God who was just loved the Lord, and she was up in years, and somebody said to her, Why, you can't trust those stories in the Bible. Don't you know that the children of Israel, they've proved that the children of Israel just walked through the Red Sea in ankle-deep water. And she started praising God and said, woo, praise the Lord. Why, that's fantastic, amazing. And he said, well, why are you praising God? I just disproved you. She said, why, God drowned the whole Egyptian army in ankle-deep water. He did. He did. It wasn't ankle-deep water, but he drowned the whole Egyptian army. They went through on dry ground. The fire lifted, and Pharaoh said, oh, look, my slave labor is getting away, and they have a ready-made highway right through there. He starts chasing after them, and God allowed the water to come back and drown the whole Egyptian army. And it was a watershed moment, a huge moment in the history of Israel. All of a sudden, they saw the crazy, amazing power of God and His love for them and concern for them. Problem was that God had to teach them that if they were going to be faithful to Him, here's how they were going to do it, and He gave them the 10 Commandments. The problem was this, that while Moses was on the mountain with God getting the 10 Commandments, the people already started turning away from God. They weren't sure what had happened to Moses. He'd been up there for a number of days meeting with the Lord, almost 40 days. And they said, why, we don't know what's become of this Moses guy. You better do something about it. We're not going to sit here at the base of this mountain forever. And Moses' brother Aaron was kind of afraid and scared of the people. This is a lot of folks here, and I don't know what to do, and I'm not sure where Moses is. And so he said, well, give me all your gold. And so they took off gold earrings, and they took it all off and gave it to him. And he hammered it out into a calf like a god. And they all bowed down and began to worship this calf. And he said, this is your God that brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And Moses came down, and he's furious and angry, and he turns the people's hearts back to the Lord. And the rest of the story, the next about several hundred years, is this story of the children of Israel who would go after the Lord, and God would bless them, and then they would turn their back on Him and forget Him and worship other gods, and God would send judgment on them, and up and down and up and down and up and down, just like that, over and over and over and over and over again, almost like they were being unfaithful to that marriage vow that God had made to them and they had made to the Lord. In fact, God then tells Hosea in the middle of a series of kings that have been unfaithful to God. In the middle of a series of kings who have drifted away from the Lord, God says to Hosea, I've got something I want you to do. Let's look at it in verse 2. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, go, take to yourself an adulterous wife and children of unfaithfulness, because the land is guilty of the vilest adultery in departing from the Lord. Now, this is very interesting, that God would go say, basically, go, Hosea, go marry a prostitute. Go marry an unfaithful, adulterous woman. Now, most Bible scholars agree that this is Hosea writing later and looking back on this moment. So it's not like God said, go marry a prostitute, because there were specific laws that God had already laid down that said you are not allowed to marry a prostitute. Okay, this had already been established. But now Hosea's looking back on this and saying that God told me to go marry someone, and that someone was unfaithful to me. But I know God told me. He knew that God told him to marry. Now, the one thing that we don't know is this. We don't know if God told him that she would be unfaithful in advance. We don't know. It's possible. It's possible. In fact, I would even say it's probable that God told Hosea, I want you to go marry that girl. And that girl is not going to be faithful to you. What do you do? What do you do in that situation? Well, let's continue reading. Verse 3, so he married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim. And I should stop and say, every time I say Gomer, the first image that pops into everybody's mind is Gomer Pyle. It's not Gomer Pyle, okay? Let's just get that out of the way right now. He married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim. Verse 5, and she conceived and bore him a son. I want you to feel for a moment the excitement of a wedding day, right? I remember when all the preparations had been made, and I woke up on a sunny, bright morning, June the 15th in Parsons, Kansas, and I walked out of the hotel where I was staying and took my luggage, and I packed it all up and put it in the trunk of a car that I knew my friends were going to decorate later that day. And I drove over to a church in Parsons, Kansas, and I got things kind of ready. And then, after I changed into my tux, I walked back into a back room where they had prepared and set up, and there was a beautiful girl in there who was wearing a white dress and a veil. And I walked in, she's mine. She's mine. That's mine right there. That's my girl. That's that's I was clapping, I guarantee you. That's my girl. And then the moment where I'm up front, there's all of our attendants and groomsmen and bridesmaids. Everybody's all there, and the kids all come in. We had a bunch of kids and music in our wedding, and prediction, I don't know. And then the door opened back at the back of the worship center, and this beautiful girl stepped up to the back, and she sang a song to me, and she came down to the front, and I surprised her with a song and sat her down and sang a song to her that I wrote. I'll have to sing it for you sometime. And then the preacher talked words, and I don't remember most of the words. And then he said, "You can kiss your bride," and I did. And 14 years later, here we are, still holding hands, and still pretty much enjoying it. No. That was just for her benefit. Still, you remember that excitement? How many remember your wedding day? Yeah. The excitement of that moment, and sometimes the stress of that moment. Oh, they were going to get married, and they'd settle down, and she was a little, maybe a bit immature, but she was beautiful, and he was so happy to be her husband, and they would settle down. They'd be so happy together. There would be kids and a home, and he would work hard, and he'd build a house, and then they'd sit on the porch and watch the sunset and talk about the future and the dreams that they had. And the bride was prepared, and the family was gathered, and the music played, and her beautiful hand grabbed his strong arm, and Hosea was happy. She was beautiful, radiant, full of joy. The ladies commented, the men smiled and punched him in the shoulder. He was so lucky. She had been chased by all kinds of different men, but now she was his. And good days were ahead. Verse 5, she conceived and bore him a son. And the Lord said to Hosea, "Call him Jezreel, for I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel." I don't have time to go into that story, but it was one of those times where Israel was up and down. It was terrible. It was not a good situation. "And I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel." You see, God was speaking into Hosea's life in such a complete way that he was calling Hosea to live out and literally speaking into the names of his children messages. The word Jezreel, the name Jezreel means scattered by the Lord. And so he's saying, I'm going to scatter the children of Israel. I'm going to wipe out the nation of Israel and scatter the leftovers among the nations. I am not pleased with the way things have been going. God had promised that if his people would remain faithful, he would bless them and reward them in 10,000 different ways, but they had not remained faithful. They had wandered off from him. And so he said, I'm going to take this kingdom, I'm going to take this nation, I'm going to smash it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it all among the nations. And I think I'm reading into the story here, but I think over the course of time, Hosea starts to notice, maybe it's after the birth of Jezreel, he starts to notice some differences in her attitude, a coolness, a distance. Suddenly she'd rather spend time with somebody else. She'd rather spend time with family. She'd rather do anything almost. Is it his imagination? Or maybe it's, but over the weeks, as they struggle to raise this little boy, Jezreel, on his salary, she gets more distant. She doesn't talk about the future or dreams anymore. She doesn't want to go on a walk. She doesn't want to sit with him. She seems taken up with other things and other events and other relationships. So he works harder and he tries to stay close and he makes an effort. At times he thinks they're winning. They're moving closer together. But then it seems like each time, just then she pulls away again. She finds excuses to be gone. Normally it's legitimate stuff. I mean, at least at first. Family has needs. There's a trip she wanted to take. There's an opportunity she wanted to take advantage of. Then it's more obvious. I just need a break. I can't take the stress of all this. I just need some space. Often, although they share a bed, she'll face the wall and refuse his advances and fall asleep, leaving him to stare at the ceiling and wonder, what's wrong? He's almost surprised when she comes home and says she's pregnant. He smiles. He tries to act glad, but surprise and dread and some doubt fill his heart. When is the baby coming? He asks. It's possible, but the timeline doesn't seem to add up to him. Hosea sits late that night by the fire and wonders, staring into the fire, hoping against hope that he's wrong. What has happened? I've been faithful to her. I've watched over her. I've protected her. I've provided for her. Verse 6, Gomer conceived and gave birth to a daughter. And then the Lord said to Hosea, call her Lo-Ruhamah. Lo-Ruhamah is a Hebrew name that means no mercy. For I will no longer show love to the house of Israel, that I should at all forgive them. The pregnancy was hard. Gomer seemed to be even further out of his reach. She was often sullen and critical. She argued often. She only seemed happy when she had a chance to get away and visit family or go to the marketplace. Hosea would take Jezreel to work, and once he happened upon her in the marketplace coming out of a man's shop, and she was smiling and giggling like her old self, and then she saw him. Hosea began to hear rumors. He saw her eyes move to others. He watched her slip through his fingers. Verse 8, after she had weaned Lo-Ruhamah, Gomer had another son. And then the Lord said, call him Lo-Ami. This time, there was no doubt. Lo-Ami means not my people, not my son, not my nation. There was no doubt. There was only horrible certainty. And it was doubly confirmed by the name that the Lord gave Hosea and said, call your son Lo-Ami, not my people. There are 4 things that you need to know about this story. Number one, you and I are Gomer. You see, God spoke this word into Hosea's life and spoke and actually called the message to flow out through the events of his life to speak a message to the children of Israel. And you know what that message was? That message was, I have been faithful to you. As God, I have watched over you and supplied your needs. I have given you these guidelines. I have watched over you and protected you and taken care of you, but you have not been faithful to me. And I think you and I would have to admit, that if it was not for God, we'd all have real problems. We'd all be dead. In fact, every one of us today, the truth is we'd say, God woke me up again this morning, right? How many of you times have you heard somebody say, I just thank God for another day. He woke me up this morning. Not only that, but He watched over you. He supplied your needs. He's watched over your children and your life and your home. He's given you so much. Not only that, He's caused you to be living in a time of general prosperity, in a country that is blessed in a million ways. He's watched over you. But the truth is that you and I have taken the love of that God who has been so good to us, and we have, in sin, been unfaithful to Him. That is the whole message of the lostness of people. The Bible says in Romans 3:23 that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Every single person has sinned against God. When we knew what was right, we chose to do what was wrong. In fact, think about this. When was the last time you took something and put it in the place of God? Put it in the place that God deserved. And you said, I know this is what God asks of me, but I feel like this time, this is more important. I know that maybe it's personal comfort. Maybe it's personal opinion. Maybe it's the path you'd like your life to take. Maybe it's a job, or maybe it's money. How many of you have seen people put a job or money or sports or a relationship or a girlfriend or a husband or a wife ahead of the Lord? How many of you have seen that? Maybe you have too, right? In fact, the truth is we all have. John Calvin, centuries ago, said, the human heart is an idol factory. Not idle as in not working, but idle as in bow down and worship. Right? An idol factory. What's he saying? He said, we invent things to put in the place of God. I remember a season of my life where I had decided, I felt like the Lord talked to me about this and said, this situation or this entertainment or this situation in your life is taking the place of me, and I don't want that to happen. And I said, well, you know what? That's right. I'm going to get rid of that. And in my journal, just a few weeks later, I wrote, why is it that every time I get rid of an idol, it seems like another one takes its place? You know why? Because the human heart is an idol factory. In the Old Testament, God uses this language, not just in the book of Hosea, but in many other places. He says to the nation of Israel, you have chased after your lovers. You have chased after other lovers. You've said, oh, here's a boyfriend for me over here. Oh, look, this one will take care of me. How many of you have seen that happen in real life, right? Oh, here's a situation where I'm not happy with this one. This one doesn't do this for me, but over there's one that will. Oh. Unfaithfulness. Spiritual unfaithfulness. You and I, you see, are Gomer. Look at verse 5 of chapter. It's actually a different chapter. You and I are Gomer. Underneath that point, it says, their mother has been unfaithful and has conceived them in disgrace. She said, I will go after my lovers who gave me my food and my water, my wool and linen, oil and my drink. In America, we have a whole list of things that we feel like are going to give us what we need. Maybe it's a job, maybe it's money, I've seen people who have fallen into all kinds of foolishness because they felt like that where they had to get their money was here or there or over there. A while back I think I told you this story a while back. I sat across from a guy, And he said, I've got this guy staying with me, and he said he sells some pills. He gets 100 Roxys a month, and he sells some. He takes a few and sells some to supplement his income. I said, oh, he's a drug dealer. And he said, no, he's not a drug dealer. He supplements his income. And I leaned across the table and said, he's a drug dealer. Well, yeah, I guess so. What was he saying? I've seen people who had. I know a family that I was working with a while back who had somebody who was staying in the house with them, and they didn't want to get rid of that person because the supplementing their income from that person's illegal sale of drugs was needed to help them pay the bills. I think maybe, hear me out on this, maybe it could be that you're chasing after another lover, right? Maybe it could be that, but you know what? It doesn't have to be that extreme. It can be really, really sneaky in your life and mine. I've seen people chase after something, anything to give them joy. They weren't happy in their marriage. Oh, better have another baby. No, literally, I've seen it. Why? Because that's going to make me happy. It's going to give me joy. I've seen people deal with all kinds of things by setting up any idol that would work, anything that would give them joy. You and I are Gomer. Number 2, this is what you have to know. God's love is tough. God's love is tough. Look at what God says in the prophecy of Hosea. Therefore, I will block her path with thorn bushes. I will wall her in so she cannot find her way. She will chase after her lovers, but she will not catch them. She will look for them, but will not find them. Then she will say, I will go back to my husband as at first, for then I was better off than now. No. But she has not acknowledged that it was I who gave her the grain, the new wine and the oil, who lavished on her the silver and gold, which they used for Baal. And that's an idol, one of the names of the common idols of that day in that land. He said, I gave you all of this. I didn't have to, but I gave it to you. And then you went and used it on that. You went and made a golden idol. You went and offered this idol, this harvest I gave you. I made it grow. I sent the rain. I made the harvest come. You harvested it and took it to Baal and worshiped him with it. I got to tell you, sometimes I'm afraid that God looks at your life and mine and says, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? I gave you that what you needed. I gave you what you needed, and you took the blessing and went and gave it to a false god. You gave it to something else. You gave your devotion, your love, your worship to something else. I've watched people sometimes follow God in the hard times, then be blessed and walk away from Him in the good times. Which is incredible, isn't it? Like you would think it would be opposite. Mentally, you would think like, oh, God's, when times are hard, that's when people will walk away from the Lord. Not always. Not always. Sometimes in the hard times, they return and they remember, like this adulterous wife here said, I will go back to my husband as at first, because then I was better off than now. Like they're coming back to the Lord in the hard times, but when blessing comes, they walk away. When blessing comes, they want to say, yeah, boy, I called that one right. Yeah, I got it. You know what? I made the right decision there. Boy, I tell you what, I have worked. And you're like, yeah, but you worked hard back in the hard times too, and you didn't have anything. Then God blessed you, and you walked away and blamed it on your own self. Oh. Therefore I will take away my grain when it ripens, and my new wine when it is ready. I will take back my wool and linen, intended to cover her nakedness, and I will expose her before the eyes of her lovers, and no one will take her out of my hands. I will stop all her celebrations, her yearly festivals and new moons, her Sabbath days, all her appointed feasts. I will ruin her vines and her fig trees, which she said were her pay from her lovers. Let me stop and explain. When you worshipped the Baals, the Canaanite gods, they were fertility gods of the Canaanite region. So you would worship these false gods, and the idea was that these gods would cause your lands to be fertile. And so if you were a farmer, you worship Baal, your crops grow, and you say, see, Baal has blessed me. Oh, thank you, Baal. Oh, you're so amazing. And God says, no, I did that. I did that. Baal didn't do that. But he says, I will take away all those blessings. All that things that they thought were from her lovers, I will make them a thicket, and wild animals will devour them. I will punish her for the days she burned incense to the Baal. She decked herself with rings and jewelry, and went after her lovers, but me she forgot, declares the Lord. In faithfulness, listen to me very carefully. In God's faithfulness, sometimes He will take away from you. In His faithfulness to you, sometimes He will remove blessings from your life so that you will know Him, so that you will come back to Him, so that you will follow Him. Sometimes the way of the unfaithful is hard, Proverbs 13:15 says. I want to tell you the story briefly. I want to sketch the story of Abraham Frere. We mentioned that Ruth goes and visits him. Abraham has been moving toward the Lord, but there was a day when he was 10, 11, 12 years old where he would come to this church. He came to our youth group. I preached many times to Abraham. One day I sat right here on those stairs right there, and I remember Abraham asking some hard questions, and he was wrestling. You could tell he was wrestling with two paths. Which one will I walk? And I warned him as he began to move and lean toward that path of gangs and alcohol and drugs and trouble and partying. I warned him. I said, Abraham, you're going to get in trouble. And he did. And I went to his first court date. And I warned him at that first court date, and in the conversation afterwards, I said, Abraham, someday, I know you're in a court date right now and you're going to have some community service, but someday I'm going to visit you in juvenile if you continue on this path. It wasn't that long before I visited him in juvenile. And I sat across the table from him, that plastic table in that concrete block room. And I sat across from him and said, Abraham, he said, you remember when you told me someday you'd visit me in the Berry house? And I said, yeah. I do. I said, but Abraham, you think this is the end, but it's not. The truth is, I'll visit you at county jail someday if you keep on this path. I sat across the glass, leaning up close through that screen where they won't let things pass through, and speaking through the thick double safety glass. I talked to Abraham as he was handcuffed to the table on the other side of the glass. And I said, Abraham, how you doing? He said, I'm okay. He said, you remember Pastor Darrell, when you told me you'd visit me in county? I said, yeah, I remember that. And Abraham, you're facing a lot of trouble, but I want to tell you, while you're waiting for this court date, I want you to understand, someday I will visit you in prison. You haven't hit the bottom. You haven't gone all the way down this path yet. Someday I'll visit you in prison. While he was in jail, while he got out and he was awaiting the court date later that would eventually send him to prison. And while he was there, I said, Abraham, you got to get turned toward the Lord. You got to make the turn. You got to forsake sin. You got to leave those things. If you don't, I said, you think it's the ultimate is that I visit you in prison, but understand this, I will someday visit you in the hospital or the morgue. You got to understand that's the next thing, and I don't want to be there. I don't want to do that. I don't want to sit across from you, Abraham, and do that. And I will never forget the day when I got the phone call and drove like a crazy person up Western Avenue and pulled into the Southwest Medical Center, and the cops were there and people were there, and some of his friends that I knew, guys that have sat here in church, are in the back of squad cars, and I go in and I tell them who I am, and they escort me back, and Abraham is holding on to the sides of a hospital bed. I will never forget the bloody sheets and as he cried out, breathing into the mask. He had been shot in a gang shooting. He had been hit in the back and is paralyzed from the waist down. And he said, Pastor Darrell, you said this was going to happen. You said this was going to happen. I said, Abraham, be quiet. Listen, you haven't reached the end yet. You haven't reached the end yet. There is a God who still loves you and is still merciful to you. And sometimes God takes and He takes and He takes and He takes, and He has to remove blessings so that you and I will understand that He is a jealous God and He calls us to be faithful to Him. He calls out to you, be faithful to me, stay true to me, do what is right, follow after me, don't chase after the gods of this world. And sometimes in His tough love, in His faithfulness, He loves you so much, He says, I'm going to have to take that blessing. I'm going to have to take that blessing. I'm going to have to take that blessing. Because I can't have you thinking that it's all about you and the false gods of this world. I won't do it. Because He loves you so much. Number 3. God's love doesn't give up easily. You see, in Hosea chapter 11, let's read it together. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. But the more I called Israel, the further they went from me. They sacrificed to the Baals. They burned incense to images. It was I. Can you hear this? Can you hear this? I think if you can see Hosea sitting beside the fire with his head in his hands, and little Lo-Ami, his son, not my people, with his having finally fallen asleep, and Gomer's gone, and she's gone, and he finally knows, and she's not coming home tonight. She hasn't come back. She's not repenting. She's not turning her back. And he realizes, and he knows that he's alone. And if you can hear his cries and hear his weeping and hear his sobbing, I think you'll understand this passage of Scripture. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk. God uses another word for one of the tribes of Israel. It was I who taught him to walk, taking them by the arms, but they did not realize it was I who healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness and ties of love. I lifted the yoke from their neck, and I bent down to feed them. But my people are determined to turn from me. Even if they call to the Most High, He will by no means exalt them. And look at verse 8. I call this the sob of a brokenhearted God. How can I give you up, O Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? I think I know that feeling because I have cried out over some of you in prayer. Oh, that you would not turn away from the Lord. Oh, you teenagers, you guys don't even know. You don't even know, but your moms, your dads, and I have laid on our faces before God and cried out for you. Oh, how can I give you up? I can't let you walk away from the Lord. I can't do it. I have cried out for some of your marriages. Oh, that God would heal. Oh, that God would give you the ability to forgive and put it back together again. I have cried out for you. And God does too. You see, God knows. This is why I call this series A Scandalous Love. Because God knows about our unfaithfulness. He knows every sorry detail, and He still pursues after you. He doesn't give up easily. He knows who you are. He knows what you have done, and He chases after you. And He will not easily walk away. This is amazing, insane, crazy. Why would God keep doing that? Why not just give up? Why not just walk away? Let me tell you why. Because His love is not like the love you have heard about in the stories and the songs of our culture. His love is not like what you have seen walked out in front of you in the world around you. His love is not like those who are out there in the world. His love is unbelievable and scandalous in its faithfulness. He chases after you, even when you've walked away. Number 4. God's love foresees a day of redemption. Next week, I'm going to cover this more thoroughly, but I have to tack it on here because I can't let this sermon all be bad news. Okay? I can't do it. Look at this. Yet the Israelites, see, this is right after God is proclaiming His judgment. Right after He's saying He's going to take away blessings. Look at this. Yet the Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the same place where it was said to them, you are not my people. Lo ami, you are not my people. In the same place where it was said to them, you are not my people, they will be called the sons of the living God. In the same place where it was said to them, you are not my people, God says, I'm going to say, my people. You are my people. The people of Judah will be reunited, and they will appoint one leader and will come up out of the land. For great will be the day of Jezreel. Now, I got to stop and explain that, okay? Because I just told you a while ago that the name Jezreel was given to talk about God scattering the Israelites among the nations. He's going to shatter their nation, their lives, and throw it out into the nations. And some of you know exactly how that feels because you felt like my life has been broken into a billion pieces and I can never pick it back up again. I feel like I don't even know where all the pieces are. I've been shattered so thoroughly. I have no idea what's going on in my life. But listen to me. The name Jezreel can mean scattered by the Lord, like broken and shattered and scattered pieces that are lost forever. It could mean that. But it can also mean God sows, scattered like seed. God sows, like sowing seed, scattered like seeds. You see, the same God who said, I will break and shatter for the brokenness and for the unfaithfulness and the foolishness of my people. I will shatter this this relationship that I have put together. That same God said, I'm going to bring the people back together again. I'm going to take all these broken pieces and I'm going to gather them from out here and I'm going to gather them from out here and I'm going to put it back together because great is going to be the day of Jezreel. Great is going to be the day where God says, the harvest is time. I've scattered the seeds. You thought the pieces of your life were broken like 1,000 pieces of a shattered mirror, and you don't even know where the pieces all are. But I have good news for you. The truth is, if you'll turn around and come back to me, I'll turn all those pieces into seeds of blessing. And all of those broken pieces, wait till you see the harvest I bring together. Great is the day when I gather the harvest out of the seeds that I have sowed out of the broken pieces of your life. See, there is no one like our God. You don't even know where the broken pieces are. But I will tell you this, that the broken pieces you've left strewn along behind, God saw where every one of them fell. And the broken relationship and the distrust and the anger and the foolishness and the sin and the shattered relationships, all of it can be brought back to the Lord. All of it can be brought back to Him. He knows where every piece fell. And not only can He put the pieces back together, but He can bring in a harvest bigger than you can even imagine. Because great will be the day of Jezreel, the day when God gathers all that He has sown. I want you to bow your heads with me together and let's pray.